Level 1. Conscript Trooper. You climb down from the troop truck at Mojave Outpost with an enlistment chit in your pocket, a service cap wet with sweat, and armor that smells like the last body issued it. The recruiter back west talked about steady meals, pay, and serving the Republic. Nobody mentioned the waterline under the statue. Inside the barracks building, a tired corporal slides you a dented helmet, a bedroll, and a service rifle with someone else's initials cut into the stock. At the payroll desk, you write your mother's name in the boneyard so half your pay goes home. The clerk does not look up. By noon, you are riding east past Nipton with dust blowing through the truck slats, while older troopers talk about lottery tickets and crucifixions without lowering their voices. At Camp Searchlight, the driver slows long enough for you to see dead storefronts, yellow waste barrels, and NCR tape snapping in the wind. Nobody says Vulps in Culta except like a curse. At dusk, your squad stacks sandbags at a river checkpoint above Cottonwood Cove, while the sky goes red over the Narrows. Shots break from the hills above the road, and you hit the dirt before you know where the Legion is. Your sergeant crawls through the dust-screaming sectors while rounds chew the canvas, and the man beside you bleeds through his sleeve. After dark, you help bandage him in the shack by lantern light and understand what the uniform is for. It is one more body on a road the NCR is scared to lose. Before dawn, the sergeant loads 3 replacements into another truck and says, "Forlorn Hope needs bodies more than this checkpoint does." At sunrise, the outpost disappears behind dust, and the Mojave has already decided where you are useful. Level 2. NCR Trooper. At Camp Forlorn Hope, you stop feeling new because the camp does not leave room for it. You wake in wet canvas with fever coughs all around you and boots nobody bothers to remove because alarms come too fast. At the chow line, men eat thin beans and stare toward Nelson without naming the troopers still hanging there. In the command tent, Major Palatli leans over maps that never improve, while Tech Sergeant Reyes stretches too little ammo across too many hands. The Republic still talks like a nation. Here, it sounds like shortage. By afternoon, you're escorting a supply run through blasted scrub east of camp, passing burned trucks and dog tags nailed to a board. Rifle fire breaks from the rocks, and the whole road flips from hauling crates to crawling for cover. You shoot at red blurs in the heat, while the man ahead of you takes a round in the throat and folds over a medical box. Back at the aid station, Doc Richards snaps at you to hold the lantern steady while he clamps the wound. Outside the command tent, the loudspeaker calls for volunteers to probe Nelson after dark, and nobody moves until a sergeant starts choosing for them. Near the motel ruins at Nelson after midnight, you creep through broken walls painted with old NCR slogans, while Legion voices drift from the barracks. You do not reach the prisoners. You only trade shots and drag one wounded man back through the dust. By dawn, the camp smells like iodine, mud, and failure. A sergeant tosses you a corporal's stripe cut off the last owner and says you kept your head better than most. By noon, outside the quartermaster tarp, you are counting which men are now yours. Level 3. Corporal. You sew the stripe onto your sleeve in a tent at Forlorn Hope, while 2 replacements watch like rank might explain why the old owner is dead. It only means the next time somebody drops, the sergeant asks what happened. At morning inspection, you count canteens, rifle bolts, and faces, then march your fire team south past mine signs and shell craters. The men still call you by your first name until shooting starts. Then every eye turns your way at once. Near a wrecked supply cache east of Nelson, you find the Brahmin dead and the crate split open. Legion rounds hit the rocks above you before you even kneel by the bodies. One of your new men freezes behind a wheel hub. Another starts firing blind into the ridge, and the whole patrol is one bad second away from collapsing into screaming. You crawl to the frozen one, grab his webbing, and drag him behind a crate while dust spits off the boards over your head. From the wash to your left, red cloth moves through the brush close enough to hear boots on gravel. You line up the rifle on a gap between 2 rocks, fire twice, and watch one legionary pitch forward hard enough to start the rest pulling back. At the return point, your sergeant checks the dog tags you recovered before he checks the men. Back in camp, you write letters home for the 2 troopers who lost their nerve, then sign the casualty report for the radio operator you could not drag out. That night, On the edge of the tent line, a First Recon spotter walks past the cook fire looking for bodies that can shoot straight without shaking apart. He asks who made the ridge go quiet and tells you to report to McCarran if you want a rifle scope and fewer men to bury up close. Level 4, First Recon Sharpshooter. On Camp McCarran's roof, the first luxury is distance. You sleep in a real building instead of a wet tent. Besides spotters with glass good enough to turn men into details, First Recon wastes no breath on anything but wind calls and range marks. At the range above Bitter Springs, a spotter tells you skill is the easy part, then points toward the refugee camp below and says, "This is where good optics once found the wrong targets." After that, nobody jokes much on the firing line. By evening, you are in an overwatch nest above the river with a scoped rifle and orders to count Legion movement across the Narrows. Through the glass, you stop seeing enemies as red smears and start seeing straps, mouths, and the bend of a knee before a run. When a scout in red rises from the reeds with field glasses of his own, you squeeze once and watch the body fold at a distance that feels cleaner than it should. Back in the shack, your spotter marks the shot, then marks 2 more boats drifting near Cottonwood Cove. At McCarran, that pressure turns into maps and numbers. Out here, it looks like one body floating into the reeds before dawn. At Bitter Springs a week later, one of the veterans finally talks about the massacre without lowering his voice. He says a scope can make a man feel precise enough to forget he is still obeying bad information. When Chief Hanlon comes through, he studies your notebook before your face. He says men who can observe without talking themselves stupid are wasted behind sandbags. If you want the next level, report to the Rangers and learn what it costs to move without a company behind you. Level 5, NCR Ranger. The first thing Ranger duty takes from you is noise. At Ranger Station Charlie, before sunrise, you drink burnt coffee in a blue shirt and brown vest, check your revolver, and leave with one partner instead of a squad. Just road, radio, and whatever moved there before you did. South of Novak, under the dinosaur's shadow, you read tracks where the dust crosses itself, then spend noon in the shell of Camp Searchlight, moving between dead storefronts and radiation signs, while Geiger clicks skate through the silence. The Legion did not only kill men here, it taught the whole region what fear can do to an NCR line before shooting starts. At dusk, you are back near Charlie, checking a relay box when the first explosion throws dirt over the sandbags. Another charge hits the antenna, and the station flips from quiet outpost to burning splinters in one breath. Through smoke, you catch red cloth slipping between rocks below the ridge. You and your partner fall back room by room. While the radio hisses for help, nobody can send fast enough. In the yard, a ranger goes down trying to reach the truck. In the comm room, you kick a desk against the door, reload by touch, and understand why isolated posts make good graves. At Camp Golf, Chief Hanlon hears your report with his face turned toward the lake. He says the Legion keeps finding soft places because the Republic keeps handing them soft places to find. Then he looks at the burns on your sleeves and says, the next jobs will need black armor, heavier guns, and men too stubborn to break when the post is already lost. Level 6, Veteran Ranger. Black armor changes the way roads behave around you. At Camp Golf, troopers who used to joke in your face go quiet when the helmet goes on, and officers start talking like they expect the job finished before the briefing ends. Veteran Ranger means the NCR sends you when a platoon would only leave more bodies there. At dawn, you ride south from Searchlight with an anti-materiel rifle, charges, and orders to cut another Legion raid route feeding Cottonwood Cove. From a bluff above the river, you glass the docks, count boats, and wait long enough to feel the whole front breathing through one narrow throat. When the escort detail shows itself on the road above the water, you drop the rear man first so the column stops confused instead of charging. Then you move before the echo dies, fire again, and turn the ridge into a place nobody can cross standing upright. Down by the dock, NCR charges blow a supply skiff apart. By the time the Legion answers, you are already halfway up the wash with the spotter in the map case. Back at Forlorn Hope, officers talk about the strike like it was neat. The med tent says otherwise. A fragment from the return chase opened your side, and Doc Richards digs metal out while fresh casualties come in from the river. Veteran Ranger does not feel like glory there. It feels like being valuable enough to patch and send back out. A week later, Colonel Shu calls you into McCarran, lays a lieutenant's bar on the desk, and says the Mojave is running out of line officers faster than enemies. He would rather leave you in black armor, but the war has started promoting anyone who can see the field without lying about it. Level 7. Lieutenant, at Camp McCarran, the first thing rank gives you is a room with a door, and the war makes that door useless. At the operations desk before sunrise, radios keep waking you with perimeter checks, missing manifests, and reports that Legion activity is tied to something nobody has proved yet. Lieutenant means people expect you to notice what will go wrong before it does. At the monorail terminal, you inspect guards whose uniforms are cleaner than their rifles and watch civilians file toward the strip like the Mojave is still normal enough for schedules. In the tower, a sergeant hands you shift logs with gaps too neat to be mistakes. By night, one of your patrols finds a dead engineer behind stacked crates and fresh wire cuts near the service corridor. The whole base changes shape at once. Search teams sweep the terminals, MPs start shoving men against walls, and every officer voice gets tighter because Legion hands already inside your fence is worse. In the control room above the monorail, you catch the saboteur 1 minute early enough to keep the station from becoming a crater. Shots crack in the glass box, alarms howl through the terminal, and your driver drops with blood on his collar while you wrestle a detonator away from a man wearing NCR khaki over somebody else's loyalty. When it ends, the train still runs, and the body on the tile proves the Legion does not always need red armor to reach you. At dawn, Colonel Shu reads the report in his office without raising his voice. Then he hands you a captain's posting for Hoover Dam approach security, which is the NCR way of saying you succeeded well enough to inherit a wider disaster. Level 8. Captain. At Hoover Dam Approach Command, war looks like clipboards. You wake before dawn in an office above stacked ammo crates, read fuel counts and medevac delays, then inspect positions that all want more men than the NCR has left to give. Captain means every request sounds reasonable, and half still get denied. On the west approach, you check service rifle squads dug into concrete, then move to the heavy trooper line where salvaged power armor creaks under the sun, and every trooper inside it wants more ammo and better welds. Below the spillway, engineers patch railings while rangers report fresh movement across the river. The Legion keeps pressing different seams because it only needs one to open. By late afternoon, Forlorn Hope calls for ammunition, McCarran calls for reinforcements, and the dam calls for more men in the intake tunnels after scouts spot infiltration signs. You send trucks south, hold one reserve squad back, and know before sunset that somebody will later call both choices mistakes. At night, the tunnels under the power station turn into steam, concrete, and muzzle flashes when Legion infiltrators hit the maintenance corridor early. You run the lower level with a carbine and a field radio, pushing engineers behind blast doors and redirecting heavy troopers to the choke points. When the last shooter drops near turbine access, the floor is slick with coolant and blood, and the generators are still running by inches. Near sunrise, Colonel Cassandra Moore reads the casualty sheet and says the dam held because somebody treated it like a system instead of a monument. Then, she tells you to report upstairs because the next level is the whole campaign. Level 9. Colonel. At Hoover Dam headquarters, Colonel Rank turns the Mojave into paper that bleeds. You wake over the turbine halls, read ranger estimates, food projections, tunnel diagrams, and casualty forecasts, then spend the morning moving battalions around a map that is too small for the trouble on it. Every piece of the line is short on men. Before President Kimball's visit, you move from sniper nests to service gantries to the visitor platform where flags and speeches are being polished for a war that cannot afford ceremony. Rangers sweep the high spots, engineers check supports, and MPs keep shoving civilians back from the approach. The dam needs to look stable even while the Legion tests for weakness under the paint. When the assassination attempt comes, it does not feel cinematic. It feels like radios barking at once, veterans sprinting toward firing angles, and one hole opening in the security plan you signed the night before. From the East Tower, you watch the platform erupt into motion while your adjutant shouts conflicting reports about sniper fire and movement in the crowd. By night, you are back in the operations room with Colonel Moore, comparing fresh Ranger intel against tunnel access points and crossing routes. She says the Republic keeps mistaking visibility for control. Near dawn, General Oliver calls you into the conference room, stands over the full campaign board, and says the second battle is no longer a probability problem. It is a schedule. He wants somebody beside him who knows the river line, the tunnel breaches, the Rangers, and the cost of each reserve squad before the order is given. Level 10, General. At general rank, the NCR stops looking like squads and tents. It becomes a wall map at Hoover Dam with grease pencil arrows, tunnel reports, and casualty numbers arriving faster than anyone can rewrite them. You stand beside Oliver before dawn while the generators throb through the concrete and every officer tries to sound certain. When the battle opens, certainty dies first. Reports come in from the intake tunnels, the east approach, the tower platforms, and the river edge almost on top of each other. Rangers in black armor hold one angle, heavy troopers brace another, line infantry burn through magazines below, and each radio call asks for men. You spend the morning moving pieces you can no longer see with your own eyes. A reserve squad leaves the west office for the lower plant. First, recon shifts to a higher nest. Engineers seal one corridor and lose another. On the board, the NCR line still looks continuous. On the field, it is a chain of frightened bodies and borrowed seconds. By noon, the command room smells like hot paper and old coffee. Oliver keeps talking about holding and making the Republic look unbreakable. You keep signing orders that turn names into arrows and arrows into silence. This is the top level of NCR power, deciding which part of the machine gets fed first. After the line stabilizes, you step out onto the dam and look over concrete stained with soot and the day's new dead. Troopers are already resetting barricades while medics drag litters west. That is the final truth of the NCR in the Mojave. Victory still comes dressed like maintenance. If you want more POV climbs through armies, factions, and the systems that spend people to stay standing, subscribe.